Good afternoon, and welcome to the Washington Institute. I'm delighted to welcome you in the room and all of you out there in live stream land to this very special event, an event to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the Jordan-Israel Peace Treaty, to look back at its origins, talk about where the relationship is today, and offer perhaps some advice on how the parties can ensure the survival of this very important diplomatic achievement in the years ahead. Now, one has to have a little sympathy for people who follow the Middle East these days. If there is a bit of Middle East fatigue, one can certainly understand that. In just the last few weeks, we've seen some rather remarkable events that one might have called black swans if they didn't happen in such quick succession, one after the other. Whether it's the breathtaking attack on the Saudi oil facilities, the violence and rioting in Baghdad, which got remarkably little attention here in the United States, the still undecided saga of Israel's political leadership, now going for before long to enter more than a year of indecision. And then, of course, the 180-degree volte-face of American policy in northeast Syria. So one cannot begrudge people left, right, center from having the view that one heard expressed on the Democratic debate the other night. I just want out of the Middle East, said one of the candidates. But of course, we can't leave the Middle East, nor should we leave the Middle East. And one of the important reasons why is today's program. The role that we play, the United States, in helping local partners reach understandings, reach even peace, and sustain it over time. It's not a role any other partner, any other player can play. It's not a role any other would-be superpower volunteers to play. It's not as though Israel and Jordan didn't have a relationship on their own, but the American glue is still significant. And so this is a bit of a plug for continued American engagement in the region. And it's to do so on a day when we are looking back and looking forward on a rare achievement that sustains itself over time. It may not be the sort of achievement that triggers fireworks and balloons every day, and it may be an achievement which has its domestic detractors in each side. But it is an achievement nonetheless that has stood the test of time for the benefits of each party. And so it's with that, and that's really the most important factor, an achievement that benefits both parties. It's with that that I'm really delighted to welcome today two of the original architects and implementers of the Jordan-Israel peace, leaders who have committed so much over the years to invest in its success and its survival, and leaders who understand that achievements like this face obstacles, both domestic and international, and it's only through the courage of conviction and the persistence and pursuit of interest that achievements like this can survive over time. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Jawad Anani. Dr. Anani, actually, both speakers I've had the pleasure and privilege of knowing for more than 30 years. Dr. Anani was, way back when, the coordinator of Jordan's peace process delegation. He has served in such august positions as Deputy Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, Chief of the Royal Court, multiple times Minister in successive Jordanian cabinets. I'm really delighted that you could be here today and join us for this event. Sitting to his left and speaking first is Professor Shimon Shamir. Those of you who follow not just the politics, but the scholarship on Middle East, know that Professor Shamir is the dean of Israel's experts on the modern Middle East. and that he is the author of a broad array of works on modern Middle East history, and he has paralleled that academic achievement where he was now Professor Emeritus at Tel Aviv University, with the unique status of having served as Israel's ambassador in both Cairo and Amman, Israel's first ambassador to Jordan after the signing of the peace treaty. And he has remained intimately involved in building this peace quietly and publicly in the 2.5 decades since it was signed. I'm really delighted that these two gentlemen are here today. We're going to turn first to Shimon and then to Jawad, and then we'll open it up to your questions and discussion on the past, present, and future of the Jordan-Israel peace. Shimon.
Allow me a moment to activate this laptop.
As Shimon is activating the laptop, I want to ask everyone to please turn your cell phones to silent, but please feel free to tweet out as much as you like of all the brilliant words of wisdom you're going to hear over the next hour and a half.
Okay, this is the presentation I prepared. I would like to thank the Washington Institute and its director, Rob Satloff, for inviting me to participate in this forum, marking the 25th year of peace between Jordan and Israel. I am also delighted to share this panel with Mr. Jawad Anani, the former Deputy Prime Minister of Jordan. Last month, we participated together in a little-known Israeli-Jordanian forum, which convenes twice a year, once in Jordan and once in Israel. And it was enlightening to listen to Mr. Anani's presentation at that forum, and I am glad to have now the opportunity to participate with him again in a discussion of Jordanian-Israeli relations. When in Amman, on that occasion, I was impressed by the growth and development of that city, which is now the capital of a country that has a population of 10 million people, more than twice the population that existed there 25 years ago when I arrived to Amman as Israel's first envoy to Jordan. This is just one of the many changes that have taken place in Jordan during that period. Naturally, peace between Jordan and Israel also underwent considerable changes. Some of the initial achievements faded away, while others remained remarkably stable. In my following presentation, I shall try to review these two aspects of the Israeli-Jordanian peace, focusing on its three main components: strategic coordination, political management, and economic cooperation. Of the three components, strategic coordination is by far the most effective, resilient, and fruitful. The reason for this is clear. It is based on solid shared interests. Let me mention first the Jordanian interest as I understand them. Jordan is a country surrounded by powerful Arab neighbors which from time to time pose various types of threats to Jordan's security or even existence. This was the case during the Nasserite campaign against the Hashemite state, during the Black September insurgency and the parallel Syrian invasion, at the time when the Islamic Caliphate of ISIS threatened to penetrate Jordan, and if you wish, also nowadays when Iranian-backed Shiite forces are entrenched in the Fertile Crescent, almost encircling Sunni Jordan. Whenever Jordan is thus threatened, the Hashemite leadership knows that on its western side, it is flanked by a state that is committed to preserve the existence and territorial integrity of Jordan, and which regards the forces threatening Jordan as its own adversaries. Indeed, when in Amman, I often heard Jordanians saying, Israel is our best insurance policy. Second, the Israeli perspective. The border of Israel with Jordan is its longest. Israel needs cooperation with the Jordanian security system to keep it safe and quiet. Above all, for the Israelis, Jordan is a buffer state, separating it from what used to be called the Eastern Front. The Israelis need an understanding with Jordan that no threats or hostilities against Israel originate from its territory and that no hostile forces are stationed within its border. In addition, both countries need joint action for combating terrorism, Islamist or other. These strategic and security interests are so fundamental that a discrete dialogue on such matters started between the two sides as early as 30 years before the conclusion of peace. This dialogue simply did not need a peace treaty to take place. In the years between the initial meeting between King Hussein and Yaakov Herzog of the Foreign Ministry in London, September 1963, and the 1994 peace agreement, exactly 50 meetings took place between the leaders of the two states. Almost every Israeli prime minister met secretly with the Jordanian king, exchanging information and coordinating strategies. Here are three notable examples of this coordination. In 1970, it led to Israeli action pressuring the Syrian invading forces to withdraw from Jordan. In 1990, a secret agreement between King Hussein and Prime Minister Shimon Shamir enabled the two countries to keep a safe distance from the war against Saddam Hussein. In 1993, Hussein came to the Mossad headquarters to inform the Israelis about Syrian concentrations in the north. All these cooperative actions took place before the conclusion of the peace treaty. After it was signed, a set of agreements formalized, widened, and partly, but only partly, brought out into the open the extent of strategic and security coordination. The principles and mechanisms of coordination in this field were set down clearly in Article 4 of the treaty. In the 25 years that passed since then, these agreements were implemented and in full, and often even beyond the written commitments. Consequently, the border remained peaceful, terrorism was curbed, and responses to strategic challenges were coordinated. I cannot say much more on this subject, not because it is confidential, but because simply I don't know much about it. I am sure that General Eisenkot, who is here, is more knowledgeable than I on these activities. So instead, I shall try to illustrate the level of closeness and even familiarity that has developed between the two defense establishments by describing a remarkable Israeli-Jordanian forum in which I recently participated together with Mr. Jawad Anani. So here is what happened. We came to a forum in which 15 generals on each side participate. They meet twice a year for about 3 days in which they discuss Jordanian-Israeli issues. They all had been involved before their retirement in cooperation activities, and the very friendly atmosphere that prevails in their meetings reflects the high level of mutual trust that had developed between them. It may also be relevant to mention the way we, the Israeli delegation, reached the meeting place, which was a nice hotel on the shores of the Dead Sea. On the Israeli side, we boarded a Jordanian bus, which took us directly to that hotel, without stopping for passport control or border checks of any kind. This smooth border crossing method is used regularly by the defense and security personnel of both sides. It is even simpler than crossing from the United States to Canada. It is thus apparent that of the 3 Jordanian-Israeli peace components, the strategic is the most effective. Second, political management. The balance sheet of Jordanian-Israeli political relations is a somewhat mixed bag. Important accords have been established, but many controversies persist. To examine this duality, I shall try to counterpose the original expectations of the two sides against the prevailing realities. And let me begin with Jordan. Jordan had originally 4 principal demands. 1, that the international border of the British Mandate time be firmly established and Israel hands back to Jordanian sovereignty areas it sees beyond that border. 2, that the special role of the Hashemite kingdom in the Islamic holy shrines of Jerusalem be recognized. 3, concerning the West Bank, Jordan expected that the treatment of Palestinians in the West Bank should not provoke disturbances that may affect the situation in the East Bank or may even drive a new wave of refugees into Jordan. In addition, the Jordanians demanded that any new arrangement established in the West Bank should preserve those Jordanian interests and links that endure even after the 1988 disengagement. And 4, that Israel's recognition of Jordan applies to the present Jordanian identity, renouncing any schemes of Jordan is Palestine, what is called al-Watan al-Badil, of course. Israel's response to these demands, as written into the treaty or expressed in declarations and actions, were the following. International border? Yes, but the Israeli farmers in the areas given back to Jordan be allowed to continue cultivating the land under Jordanian sovereignty. Thus, the special regime in Naharaim, Bakura, and the Araba enclaves came into existence. Muslim holy shrines in Jerusalem, the Washington Declaration formula is accepted, namely that Israel respects, quote, the present special role of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and in the future, when permanent status is negotiated, quote, Israel will give high priority to the Jordanian historic role. Otherwise, the practical arrangement established in 1967, by which the holy shrines are administered by the Muslim Waqf, but within the framework of Israel's United City, are to prevail. The West Bank, the Israeli-Jordanian treaty concluded after the Oslo Agreement, does not even mention the Palestinians or the West Bank. Jordan's link to the West Bank, Jordan links to the West Bank are recognized, but their scope is considerably narrowed. Israel does, however, address the Jordanian apprehensions about a possible new wave of refugees. It denounces what was called in the treaty, quote, involuntary movements of persons that may adversely prejudice the security of the other side. Regarding the Jordan is Palestine issue, Israel keeps assuring the Jordanians that any declarations voiced by Israeli politicians to this effect do not express official policy. Now, how did these political understandings work out during the quarter of a century of Israeli-Jordanian peace? 1, the special regime in the Naharaim, Araba enclaves functioned very well for 25 years. However, the issue of the enclaves has recently been reopened with the King's declaration that the special regime arrangement will be terminated. Jordan has full right to terminate this regime. The treaty specifies that if after 25 years it is not renewed by the two sides, it will expire. However, the Israelis feel that this act is not really in the spirit of the treaty. After 25 years of peace and cooperation, they say, it may be expected that the arrangement will be renewed automatically. It should be borne in mind that the farmers in the Naharaim area have been cultivating that land for over 70 years. The termination of the regime would result in the complete ruin of the farmers working in those areas. So that stands to reason that a new agreement on this issue should be negotiated. To Jerusalem. Except for the clause in the treaty recognizing the role of the Hashemite kingdom in the Muslim holy places, which is essentially a verbal pronouncement, no effective rules of conduct in the Temple Mount were agreed upon, not with the Jordanians and certainly not with the Palestinians. The situation in the Haram became a constant source of violent clashes with the Palestinians, always leading to severe crisis in the relations with Jordan. Two axes of conflict generate problems in the Temple Mount. First, the Jordanian-Palestinian competition, and second, the Jewish-Muslim controversy. Jordanians and Palestinians compete over the dominant position in the Waqf system, which administers the Muslim shrines. In this situation, the Israelis usually tend to support the Jordanian side. Yet Israel, especially since Oslo, also has commitments to the Palestinians, a duality that sometimes generates friction in Jordanian-Israeli relations. Jewish-Muslim conflicts in the Haram have created even greater damage to relations with Jordan. The gradual growth in Israeli internal politics of pressure groups determined to assert the Jewish religious and historical association with the Temple Mount resulted in repeated clashes with the Muslims in the mosques, especially during religious holidays. Palestinian extremists, on the other side, instigated attacks on Israeli police and civilians in the Temple Mount area. These violent clashes, sometimes resulting in a number of dead and wounded, fermented agitation in Jordan. They usually led to anti-peace demonstrations on the popular level and sharp protests on the political level. The disturbances in the Haram have become one of the main sources of setbacks in Jordanian-Israeli relations. Number 3, the second principal source of damages to Jordanian-Israeli peace during these 25 years was the situation in the West Bank. In the absence of any progress toward the settlement of the Palestinian problem, measures taken by the Israelis to suppress intifadas and terrorism similarly agitated the Jordanian public and nourished an anti-Israeli mood on both the public and the political level. And finally, number 4, Jordanian concerns about Jordan's Palestine trends in Israel have intensified. With the growth of extreme right and messianic leanings in the Israeli polity, such visions, though rejected by the majority of the Israelis, have gained some currency, thus casting another shadow on Jordanian-Israeli relations. To conclude this part, it is evident that the political dimension of Israeli-Jordanian peace suffers from serious controversies and conflicts. Yet, the situation has also a bright side. It turns out that in spite of the frequent crises that impair the relations, the two sides manage each time to restore normal interactions employing effective methods of crisis management. Here are 3 cases out of several in which crisis management was exercised successfully. Here is the first. The ill-conceived attempt of the Mossad in September 1977 to kill Khaled Mash'al on one of the streets of Amman. 1977. 97, sorry. 97. In 1997, I was in Jordan at the time. To kill Khaled Mash'al on one of the streets of Amman shocked the Jordanian leadership. The king refused to talk to emissaries sent by the Israeli government to seek a resolution. Furthermore, Jordanian forces were already on the verge of storming the Israeli embassy. Finally, the Israelis brought from Brussels Ephraim Halevi, who enjoyed the trust of the king, and the two worked out a deal by which the wounded Mash'al was provided with the needed antidote, and Ahmad Yassin was released from prison together with scores of Palestinians and Jordanians, and the crisis was over. In March 1997, a Jordanian soldier shot and killed 7 Israeli schoolgirls who were touring the Naharaim zone, which the Israelis call the Island of Peace. The Israeli public was enraged, and doubts about the desirability of peace with Jordan were for the first time voiced in Israel. The king dealt with this crisis with great sensitivity. He came to the place where the mourning families gathered, bent down to them, expressing his condolences and a deep sorrow. The Israeli public was impressed, and the outrage calmed down. And the third example, more recently, when an Israeli security guard who felt that his life was threatened shot and killed 2 people in Amman, the angry Jordanians refused to allow the Israeli ambassador to return to his post. Eventually, Israel was ready to apologize, compensations were paid, an Israeli ambassador was reinstated in Amman, and once again, the crisis was over. I believe that we can learn from such experiences that in spite of the various political controversies, the interests of the two sides in upholding the peace between them is firm enough to weather even such acute crisis. And finally, number 3, economic cooperation. May I have a glass of water?
Yeah.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
At the time of the conclusion of the Jordanian-Israeli peace agreement, the concept of large-scale economic cooperation between the two countries was not just an ornate addition to the treaty, but an essential part of it. Israel's peace with Jordan was very different from its earlier peace with Egypt. The Israeli-Egyptian peace had been concluded under the shadow of looming resumption of war, and thus the protocol concerning security arrangements was the core of that treaty. By contrast, in the Jordanian-Israeli arena, there were no fears of an imminent war. There was no need for demilitarized zones or international peacekeeping troops. Instead, the two sides elaborated a vision of economic prosperity achieved through ambitious cooperative schemes. The Jordanian leadership needed this design in order to provide its people with what they called the fruits of peace, thus enhancing the legitimacy of reconciliation with a former enemy. The Israelis hoped that this scheme will demonstrate to other Arab countries that peace with Israel can be impressively beneficial. So, almost half of the treaty's 30 articles dealt with cooperation schemes. In addition, following the conclusion of the treaty, 15 implementation agreements were negotiated and signed, specifying in great detail cooperative activities. The Israelis, on their part, submitted to the joint committees a catalog describing more than 100 extensive projects which, even if only partly implemented, would have changed the map of the region and greatly advanced the two economies. That catalog included such projects as industrial parks along the border, railway networks, the Red Dead Canal, the Red Sea Riviera, a joint airport in Aqaba, the lowest park on earth by the Dead Sea, and many, many others. None of these projects was executed. This failure nourished bitter disappointments in the Jordanian public, which kept asking, where are the fruits of peace? It thus fed anti-Israeli feelings in Jordan, adding another impediment to the peace relations. What were the causes of this failure? On the Israeli side, governments in Jerusalem, burdened with acute and pressing Arab-Israeli issues, did not always assign the required priority to the development of people-to-people cooperation. To many Israelis, peacemaking meant the end of the story, instead of regarding it as the beginning of the necessary peace building. On the Jordanian side, powerful anti-normalization organizations, and especially the professional unions, worked vigorously to impede any cooperative Jordanian-Israeli venture. Israeli entrepreneurs coming to Jordan with the intention of forming partnerships often left in despair, seeing that their Jordanian partners are boycotted or even expelled from their professional associations. Yet the record is not entirely negative. True, many projects were abandoned, some having been unrealistic from the outset, but several others which turned out to be workable are being implemented or are in the process of being reactivated. Here are the notable forms of existing cooperation. Israel provides yearly 40 to 45 million cubic meters of water to Jordan. An agreement was recently signed to sell Jordan natural gas from the Leviathan sea platform at prices lower than those paid by the Israeli clients. 2,000 Jordanian workers cross every morning from Aqaba to Eilat to work in Israeli facilities. Haifa port serves Jordanian trade westward, especially since the Syrian-Lebanese route became unsafe. Amman airport and Jordanian carriers serve huge numbers of Israelis traveling to the Far East. Jordanian and Israeli farmers operate cross-border joint projects, notably in the field of pest control. Some projects, which in face of mounting obstacles had run aground, are now being reactivated. The outstanding example is the Jordan Gateway Free Zone Industrial Park project, which a few years ago was all but abandoned, but recently it has been revived, and a bridge over the Jordan River connecting the two parts of the joint industrial park has been completed. Even the problematic project of the Red Dead Canal was not entirely discarded, and the two sides keep searching for new ways to implement it, perhaps in a different form. In this context, mention should also be made of the US-sponsored QIZ system, even though it is no longer operative. For about 10 years, since its initiation at the end of the 90s, goods produced in specified zones in Jordan, on the condition that they include a certain level of Israeli input, were allowed to enter the US markets without being subjected to tariff or quota limitations. This system increased the Jordanian export to the United States from $15 million to over $1 billion. From 15 to over 1 billion. The intensive Israeli-Jordanian cooperation within the framework of this system declined after a Jordan-US FTA agreement made it redundant. Yet the QIZ story managed to demonstrate the potentialities of Israeli-Jordanian economic cooperation. So to conclude this general survey of the last 25 years, we may say that Jordanian-Israeli peace knew both remarkable achievements and painful failures. Not all the things that could have been done by the two parties to strengthen this relationship were actually done. Even in the present situation, there are still many steps that can be taken to invigorate the peace. It would be, or perhaps I should conclude with a quotation from Eleanor Roosevelt from 1951. This is what she said, quote, "It isn't enough to talk about peace, one must believe in it. And it isn't enough to believe in it, one must work at it." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shimon. Thank you, Shimon. Dr. Anani.
Sir. Thank you very much. It has been a long trip to get here, but it's worth it. Thank you very much for inviting me, Rob. And I don't have much to say besides what Professor Shamir had said, but I still will like to go into and delve into other points, and probably viewing that from a Jordanian people's perspective, not only political perspective. First of all, I think that a few months ago, a group of Israeli students came to Jordan, and they wanted to swim in a pool that was not allowed because it was closed. So the mayor of the city next to that insisted that they should go for a picnic and swim in that pool, and he made sure that they did that. And then when it was time for them to leave, he went with them all the way to the border point, and in there he gave them, emblems, memento emblems of the city that he was a mayor of. Next day, I think one of the Israeli channels put that on television. And they said that the mayor, of that town had actually gone out of his way not only to break the instructions which were given to him, but also was kind enough to say that these children are entitled to do what they want inside Jordan. The story, of course, caused mixed reactions on the Jordanian side. One of them was, why would we be so nice to them when they are not so nice to us? When we cross the borders, we are subjected to a great deal of inspection. When they come free and to enter, and the Israelis do not have any problems crossing the border and coming to the other side. But I, personally, face the same things, and I have to go through inspections and so on and so forth. Although I was a man who was a senior negotiator during the first 9 rounds of negotiations, and I also, when I was appointed as a minister, I was entrusted with the task of supervising or overseeing the whole peace process, whether multilateral or bilateral, between Jordan and Israel. It finally culminated to a peace treaty that we all feel proud of. Now, the night of the signing of the peace treaty, we spent the whole night up discussing certain points. One of them was to finalize some border checkpoints, because we were fighting over technical issues like how do you determine after certain tectonic movements, since 1970 and beyond, how do you determine the border? Using Thalwig approach, or I don't know what, mid borders approach. But still, we went through those details. The other point, that the Israeli side wanted to delineate the borders between Jordan and the West Bank at that time. And Jordan insisted that this could not be done. So when Mr. Netanyahu actually comes and says he wants to annex the Jordan Valley and the areas close to the Dead Sea, that will be tantamount to almost a breach of the peace treaty. And at the same time, it will cause a great deal of negative reaction among Jordanians. So in a way, political statements and pronouncements over the last 13 or 14 years have not been very conducive to people-to-people peace. So then the question is, what lies ahead is a very important for us. And I have to sit down there and remember every Israeli party, what do they stand for, who are the main people there, what kind of a configuration, the next cabinet is going to take. Is Mr. Netanyahu coming back as a prime minister, or is he going to become, he's going to surrender, and then Mr. BWP Mr. Gantz would become the deputy prime minister until he learns how to rule, because he has not been exposed to administrative management, because he is a military man. That's what the Israeli papers are saying, not I. So in a way, all these developments actually that take place inside Israel's political arena somehow have an impact on how Jordanians view peace and how they look at it. And they are closely monitoring everything that takes place inside Israel, knowing that it would impact them. And one of the most worrisome developments that actually bother Jordanians is the fact that Israel was very much in tandem, arranging with the current American administration on what is called the deal of the century. Now, the deal of the century, of course, evokes so much fears inside Jordan, because the early warning signs that came from that deal, did not bode very well with Jordanian public. Moving the embassy to Jerusalem was not one of them. Also, not determining what the Palestinian right in Jerusalem is not very clear. The fact over the refugee issue also, that you don't want to give aid to UNRWA, was another issue that really invokes so much fears. So therefore, we were watching with a great deal of attention the evolvement and the developments which are taking place on the deal of the century. And I personally went to Jerusalem twice. One time to attend the funeral of Mr. late Shimon Peres, whom I knew very well. And at the same time, I was asked by His Majesty to represent Jordan in that funeral. And so I saw the undercurrent conflict between the then President, Mr. Barack Obama, and the Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Netanyahu. And both of them were talking different languages, why they respected and how they viewed the late Mr. Peres. To me, that was an eye-opener, and shockingly so, over a funeral. The second time I went there recently to participate on a BBC-sponsored dialogue and debate of the peace process. I was present in both Arabic and English versions of that annual show. And I sat with Mr. Naftali Bennett, who was at that time Minister of Education. And then I had read something about his CV. He was supposedly a whiz kid, a very good army gentleman. He fought very effectively. And at the same time, he was a modern technology man, a man who sold 2 companies for something like over $400 million. So he was a rich man. So after we debated, he started saying Jordan is the alternative homeland for the Palestinians. And I said, sir, don't you ever dare tell a Jordanian that. Please, don't do that. You just cannot take a plastic and eraser and just wipe out a whole country out of existence just because it feels good for you, And secondly, you are such an enlightened person. You're not supposed to be what you are, for heaven's sake. You should be a much better man. And I don't know what happened, but he lost the elections, and I wasn't extremely sad. But this is how it is. We are looking for always when they say that Israel does not have partners on the Arab side. We always say, okay, we need very strong partners on the Israeli side as well. I mean, it works on both sides of the divide. And the common ground. Not only the divide, but I have to use also a good positive word like common ground. I agree with the assessment of Mr. Shamir. First of all, I would like to add other dimensions. The gas deal, I will make opposite, points of contrast. On the waterfront, I have to agree that the 2 countries have been working very nicely on that. Nothing on the waterfront has actually, there is nothing that Jordan can complain about. Maybe once in a while there is a complaint, but as Mr. Shamir said, the 2 parties come together and they find a solution. Secondly, I believe that, Israel and even it was not the fact that 2 men were killed in one of the buildings which belonged to the Israeli embassy in Jordan that was so much insulting to Jordanians. But what was more insulting is the fact that Mr. Netanyahu received those 2 guys in his office as hero and gave them a hero's welcome. That was the thing which really agitated Jordanians to the point of anger. It was uncalled for because at that time Jordan had dealt with the issue very, very, very professionally. The man had diplomatic immunity, so he was allowed to leave with the ambassador. They left before even Jordanians started saying, why did you let them leave? Before they were put on trial. So anyway, the Jordanian official took the risk of allowing those 2 to cross the border safely until they arrived. But why would they put a show on to say that this is a hero who really shot about, I don't know how many bullets he shot, remember? Mr. Shamir?
Which case?
In the embassy.
In the embassy, 2 persons.
Yeah, I know, but he shot something like 50 rounds of bullets or something like that to kill 2 people. Wow. So in a way, we still don't know why and what was the reason that instigated that. Another judge was killed on the borders, because he was protesting to the soldier who was shoving him into the bus not to do that. And he was killed, and he was put on trial and was acquitted very soon after that. So anyway, what we're saying and what the Jordanians understand from that their blood is cheap and that Israel doesn't care about, not Israel, but Israeli authorities. I should say not, I shouldn't say Israel, but I should say Israeli authority at that time. Well, these are some of the incidents which are causing Jordanian public anger. Now let's come to the economic side. Because I'm an economist, I'm interested in the economic side. First of all, there was a gas deal signed between Noble Company and from San Francisco, Noble Gas Company, and NEPCO, which is Jordanian Electricity Company. The parliament in Jordan, when they were really infuriated by the deal of the century, they said, okay, but this should have gone to the parliament and got parliamentary approval, which caused a great deal of uproar. Well, we decided, and I was one of the people who really vouched for it because I was deputy prime minister at that time, and I participated once in a while in negotiating the deal itself. But what happened is that Jordan sent that to the Constitutional Court and said, no, since it was between 2 companies, there was no need. It was not governmental or sovereign project, but it was between 2 companies, and it didn't have to go to the parliament for approval. So the deal is still on, and it is going on. And I think it is useful, for Jordan. I have no doubt about that. But Jordanians are saying, why am I putting my eggs, my energy eggs in Israel's basket? That's what they are saying. Can we trust that? Well, my answer is, if the Israelis have been good on the water deal, they will be good on that deal. So I am for it. However, when it comes to the Jordan or the Dead Red Canal, we are faced with 2 problems. There was an agreement signed in the United States between the 3 parties, including the Palestinian Authority, that we will change the nature of the Dead Red Canal, and at the same time we will build 3 pipelines or 3-stage pipelines which will carry water. That means we will not have hydraulic electricity generated by dropping the water about 400 meters down the Dead Sea. So in a way, some Israeli experts are saying the project is not feasible. But to Jordan, it is feasible because we need water. We are the 2nd poorest country in the world in water resources. So in a way, I know that Israel now is extremely efficient, and probably they are number 1 in the world in water technology. Okay? So there is something to benefit from the relationship between the 2. In a way, the Israelis now are not talking about that, but some of them are talking about the Med Canal. And, this has been discussed so many different times, and so many times said it was very expensive and so on. I was the one who arranged with the ex-Israeli ambassador, to allow 200 Jordanian truckers to go and enter with their trucks, given that the two security sides agreed on how to do that, and allowed the trucks to go all the way to Haifa. And from Haifa, we would use row boats to send goods to Russia. And we were exporting even vegetables and fruits to Russia. So that was also another goodwill experience that figured very well, especially when Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states did not allow Jordanian goods to go through Saudi borders to even to other third country Gulf countries. When it comes to other projects, there is the airport in Aqaba. It was agreed in the early days of the peace treaty that the two countries would discuss ways and means to expand the Aqaba airport and allow Israeli planes to land in that airport, because it was the airport inside Eilat was in the middle of the city and the property was very expensive. And so they said, okay, I, with the Minister of Transport at that time, went and visited Aqaba together and even went through the details of how to move Israeli passengers who land in Aqaba to go to Eilat and ensure that they had a safe conduct, until they reached there. But then I think it was El Al who did not see that as a good option, and they wanted to build an airport. Now the airport is causing Jordan many problems, and we are losing business there as a result. So, well, what happens is that, there are very good experiences and there are bad experiences. And the most and the worst case, of course, is the trade between Jordan and the West Bank, which is really causing a great deal of sensitivity. One of them is the fact that Israel is exporting, I don't know how much, but something close to between $5 and $7 billion to the West Bank. And they are collecting, of course, the tariffs, which they are supposed to remit to the Palestinian Authority. There are differences now over what money to deduct and what money not to deduct. And as you're familiar with that story. But what I'm concerned about is the Paris Agreement that was signed between the Palestinian Authority and Israel, which needs to be revised after so many years, because the only side that is being penalized is Jordan from that. And I really just can't believe that whatever goods are sent to Israel, to the West Bank, can enter into Israel unchecked, That is, come on. There is a very secure Israeli borders, and Israeli security arrangements are extremely efficient and effective. Not even a butterfly can fly from the West Bank to Israel proper inside the green area without permission from Israeli authorities. So how can Jordan really send goods to the West Bank that will not meet Israeli standards but still find their way into the Israeli markets? So anyway, what it boils down to is the fact that some Israeli businessmen are benefiting from that arrangement, and Jordan is losing. So in a way, while we, since 1967, have left our borders open for West Bank goods to be exported to Arab countries, we did not send anything. We had a huge deficit with the West Bank. By 1991, when the peace negotiations started, the total amount added to almost $3 billion deficit in favor of the West Bank. So in a way, Jordan was financing and making it easy for Israel to be in the West Bank, at that time. And we did not get anything in return after the peace process, very little. And the issue, of course, there has been some improvements. A bridge, as my friend Mr. Shamir said, was built to facilitate movement of goods across the borders. But still, Jordan suffers from trade deficit with that. So anyway, I would like to say that the question is what lies ahead is the most important question. Is there going to be peace? Is there going to be, and what kind of peace is that? Is it going to be dependent on the treaty, on the issue that is now being, on the deal of the century? The deal of the century, for all practical purposes, I read the economic side that was published very carefully. It was cut and paste. It was correct assessment of certain projects, which we have been talking about for the last 40 years and did not work. Why suddenly those projects would work if the two sides, Jordan and Israel, did not agree on? So we need to agree on them. Minister of Transport in Israel keeps saying that we are going to build a railroad that will go through Jordan and then eventually will go to Aqaba, and from Aqaba hopefully to Saudi Arabia, and then from Saudi Arabia it will go to Iraq once things improve. But, and Jordan actually had allocated some lands for that. But the question is, there is no coordination whatsoever on this particular issue. So what we need, while we are good on security issues, we were able to serve or to get rid of what they call the Mediterranean fly in the Jordan Valley, something that Mr. Netanyahu was keen about doing, and I'll tell you a joke about it in a second just to change the atmospherics here. But one time I went with Prince Hassan to Tel Aviv to meet with Mr. Netanyahu to encourage him to be pro-peace and so on and so forth. So anyway, Prince Hassan started talking to him about the future of the tripartite arrangement and the Benelux idea, between Tel Aviv, Jerusalem at that time, and Amman, because there will be, by 2030, there will be 30 million people who need water and so on and so forth. And suddenly, we were sitting in a wedding or a party, I don't know where, on his table, because he was not happy with the fact that we did not go to Jerusalem to see him in Jerusalem in his office. So he said, Your Highness, if we can find a way to synchronize our spraying campaigns, because when you spray insecticides, the flies come to your side, and then when you spray, they come to our side. Why can't we synchronize the spraying campaigns? And of course, the prince felt that he was dragged down from the tower of dreams and coordination down to the mundane issue of the mosquitoes and the flies. So I said, Mr. Netanyahu, with all due respect, sir, you're complicating the whole issue. It can be done much easier. He said, how? I said, well, now, before we can do any spraying, we have to make sure that the security people on both sides agree on the material, and they will have to test the material that we are spraying, that both are spraying. I said, yeah. I said, after those guys finish, then, we have to have a technical committee to organize the timing and the schedule of the spraying. He said, yeah. I said, by that time, the winter season will be over in the Jordan Valley, and we lose it. We lose the whole season. He said, do you have a better suggestion? I said, yeah, very easy one. Why don't you declare the Jordan Valley a no-fly zone? He didn't laugh very much. He said, oh, yeah? That's a very good idea. Yeah. Okay. But, we have our comic moments. We did have our comic moments, but we still believe in Jordan. We in the peace camp. We talk seriously. We talk candidly with you, with our counterparts. We tell you that you here, as a very influential, center and so on, you really owe a debt of, you are supposed to do more peace effort, because peace can be done. That is the problem. You feel it is dangling from the tree, but we are not jumping high enough to grab it. It is there, and it can be done. And with this, I say thank you very much, and God bless you.
So thank you very much, Dr. Anani, and thank you, Professor Shamir. We're going to open up a discussion session, and I'd like to begin by asking you about one key party that hasn't really come up in today's discussion at all. Bill Clinton went to the Aravad to oversee and witness the signing of the peace treaty. The United States has been a partner of both Jordan and Israel, where by far and away the largest source of foreign economic support to Jordan, the source of enormous foreign support to Israel's defense. So we play a role, and it didn't come up. So what role does the United States play? What role ought the United States play in trying to safeguard and strengthen the peace that both of you described?
Yes, well,
If you could please make sure you speak into the mic. You don't have to press any
Do I have
buttons.
to
No,
press
no, no, no,
something?
don't press anything.
non-press. Okay. Well, the American role in Israeli-Jordanian peacemaking, at least initially, was very different from its role in Egyptian-Israeli peacemaking. Israeli peace, it's strange to say this in the presence of Mr. Anani, who was really involved in that. I only read about it. Peacemaking between Israel and Jordan started as a bilateral process. Washington, at the beginning, was not even aware of the level of progress that has been achieved by the two sides. As a matter of fact, in Washington, it was not believed that a peace between Israel and Jordan is feasible before peace with Syria. The general assumption was that the Jordanian government will not dare to conclude a peace with Israel while Syria is still in a situation of war with the Israelis. As a matter of fact, this was the assessment also of the Israeli intelligence. This was completely bilateral. But there was an American angle to this peacemaking process. In King Hussein's policy, he needed two things. He wanted two things. He wanted peace with Israel, and he wanted the relations with the United States to change. He needed arms from the United States. He needed economic aid from the United States. And he needed to a change in the American negative mood, especially in Congress, toward Jordan because of Jordan's link to Saddam Hussein. So before concluding peace with Israel, King Hussein came to Washington, and he met with President Clinton. He was expecting some promises. President Clinton did not give any specific promises, but Hussein understood that a new page can be turned. And this actually gave him the green light for proceeding also on the Israeli-Jordanian level. But this was not, of course, the end of the story. King Hussein could not really change the mood in the United States, so the Israelis came in, and they started lobbying very energetically for Jordan. I think it is Dennis Ross who writes in his book that Ephraim Halevi, who was working on this lobbying, trying to change the attitude to Jordan to a more positive one, was asked at one point by Ross, whom are you actually representing? Are you representing Israel or are you representing Jordan? And he said, both. And this was really the situation. So this really cleared the way for Jordan's complete commitment to peacemaking with Israel. And by that, gradually, the United States got involved. The first document of agreement between the two sides is called the Washington Declaration. It was declared here in this city. And the involvement became more and more extensive. Finally, when the peace agreement was concluded, President Clinton signed it as a witness. We have the three names on that peace treaty. The United States acted in order to strengthen the ties between the two sides. And I mentioned the QIZ, which was really an American concession in order to enhance Jordanian-Israeli economic cooperation. And when it was replaced by an FTA, Jordan was, I think, the fourth country in the world to sign an FTA agreement with the United States, after Canada, Mexico, and Israel. So I think all these actions on the part of the United States reflected a serious interest in the United States to promote relations between the two parties. I am not sure that this spirit still dominates American policy, that the interest in Jordanian-Israeli relations is very high. I don't know. I wish I could hear more on this subject here in Washington. But the feeling is that American interest in this peace relationship is somewhat reduced. The fact is, the United States doesn't have an ambassador in Washington, in Amman. And this situation has been going on for a long time. I don't know, Mr. Anani, how long you don't have an American ambassador?
Well, since about 6 months after President Trump
2 years.
was sworn in.
And you see the connection.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a little bit disappointing, but I think the basic role of the United States in this relationship is still there.
Jawad?
Thank you very much. I think that the United States, no matter what, whether the parties, are angry with the United States position, they think it is unjust, biased or so, but still everybody believes that it is the key player. The key player in the peace process, and also it is the one that is going to make a difference because of the leverage it has with all the different parties. They have leverage with the Saudis and the Gulf states. They have leverage in Jordan. They have a leverage also on other areas. Of course, right now there is a big discussion over the fact that the American troops were pulled out of northern Syria, which from an Israeli point of view is not a very good decision because they think that it was a betrayal, not betrayal, I said that's a strong word, but a reneging on promises that were made to Israel. And also, President Putin right now is in a position to be asked about the coordination which he had with the Israeli government on certain issues on when to strike, when not to strike, who to strike inside Syria. So in a way, the situation right now looks a little bit murky. But coming to the peace process itself, I think it is the only thing that is left for us to redeem the spirit there. Because we don't know what will happen inside Syria. We actually don't know what may happen inside Iraq. And the Gulf states, no matter how powerful and important they are economically and financially, but still they cannot play the main role in making peace in between the different parties. The parties that are supposed to make peace, of course, are the PA, the Palestinians, vis-a-vis Israel, and also Jordan sitting there. The question, why is Jordan right now not being given the attention it merits, and it should play the role it can play? It can play because it has also it can exercise a leverage on the PA to really move along the peace process. And at the same time, we still can manage our relations with Israel because there are track 2 discussions going on. So in a way, we need to enhance track 2 discussions right now. And I think that the Americans should become aware of this track 2. And hopefully we can chart some sort of a reasonable way to arrive at peace. Peace that not only, by the way, a very dynamic peace in the sense that it should move immediately from the sphere of wishes and dream projects into actual implementation of such projects. And to do that, you need the West Bank, you need the Israeli active involvement, and you need Jordanian involvement as well. The fact that now Saudi Arabia, for instance, after the turning over of the two islands to Saudi Arabia, made Israel and Saudi Arabia naval partners or marine neighbors, is not going to replace the importance, the geopolitical position of Jordan as the connecting geography with the rest of the Arab world. So in a way, instead of continuously overarching for Israel, where then they can use physical borders to go, and all these projects about pipelines, even pipelines in the future, because we should imagine a situation 10 years from now that will make Jordan, I think, is extremely important and more pertinent to Israel than what it is right now. The question now is that we have the longest borders with each other, but the more important dimension of this is the fact that future projects where Israel can become an active Middle Eastern economic and political player will also be very much dependent on what projects go through Jordan as a connecting point.
Okay, thank you. Let's turn the floor over to your questions. I'd be grateful if you would identify yourself and say to whom you're directing your question, and of course, always questions, not speeches. David Makovsky.
Thank you both for a very interesting overview and reminding us of a very important milestone in modern Middle Eastern history. A question for each. Shimon, can you speak to Jawad Anani's point about Jordanian exports to the West Bank? I mean, given the size of the Israeli economy and Jordan's small size, increasing Jordan's share in exports to the West Bank would seem that it would be very much an Israeli interest as well. The numbers are small to go, I don't know if it's 125 million to 500 million. It would be significant for Jordan, but Israel might not even feel it. And for Jawad Anani, could you speak a little bit to a development over recent years, maybe not envisaged in 1994 when you signed the treaty, of course, but the development of Israel-Gulf relations? Do you see this as a bridge on the Palestinian issue or a bypass road? Is this a positive development as far as Jordan is concerned? It's kind of under the table, but it's not fully under the table. It's getting crowded under the table's starting to levitate. Is this a good thing for Jordan or not? So if I could get both of your comments. Thank you very much.
Actually, Jawad, why don't you start with this one?
Okay. Well, to be honest with you, Jordan views this differently from the Israeli government. It's because we think that the fact that Iran has become, I was stopped at the airport here and asked when I arrived in Washington, D.C., because there were 2 Iranian visas on my passport. I visited Iran in 2017 and 2018. And I really was happy that I made those 2 visits because it gave me an opportunity to see on the ground what is happening there. So Iran has stolen the scene from the Middle East. And the main reason which really prompted the relationship between Israel and the Gulf states was Iran, to be honest with you. So in a way, we're asking, okay, if the Iranians and the Americans get to begin negotiation with each other, what is going to happen to the relations between Israel and the Gulf states? I think that Israel must come to the point, and the United States of America foreign policy should also recognize this, that for the long haul, you need to rely more on the countries which have signed peace treaty with you, not the countries that find you utilitarianly useful. So in a way, while we want to encourage peace with those countries, but it has been, the way it has developed is because, Israel and the Israeli government has been using that relation with the Gulf states as an excuse not to engage fully in the peace negotiations. And they think that they don't have to make peace with the Palestinians or with others because they now have managed to get and arrive at the Gulf states. Now, my question is that really a permanent relationship? Can you actually sit there and say it will stand the test of time? That is a question that I'm posing to you. And hopefully, I hope it will. But hopefully it will come at a time when there are no obstacles to movement, that the peace is there. Of course, many people are saying, okay, I think I will just be in. That's it. I said enough.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Fascinating. Shimon.
Yeah, on the question of Jordanian West Bank economic relations and the problems that are still there in the triangle, Jordan, Palestine, Israel, there is a clash of interests here. From the political angle, Israel basically wants to satisfy the demands coming from the Jordanian side whenever the Jordanians regard it as something very essential, very important to them. And there is a feeling that the present arrangement should be reconsidered. People speak especially about reconsidering the Paris Protocol,
Yes, exactly.
the Paris Protocol, which regulates economic and trade relations in this triangle. So this is on the one side. On the other hand, to speak frankly, there are also business interests involved in this. Whatever the Jordanians export to the West Bank will replace Israeli exports to the West Bank. The West Bank market is a very convenient one for many Israeli businesses. So there are pressure groups, there are political considerations, and the issue is being discussed now very energetically in Israel.
Okay.
May I add something?
Sure.
Yeah? The Paris Protocol, which was signed between the PA and between Israel and the PA, actually has a very long negative list that goods that cannot be imported by the Palestinians from other countries, from third parties. Now that needs to be revised.
Yeah.
Secondly, I think that $1 billion exports from Jordan to the West Bank and vice versa, would be very helpful. Thirdly, I think that Israeli businessmen, if not the same guys who are exporting to the West Bank, can send more goods to Jordan. And that is also an important point to take into account.
Yeah, well, these are the things that are being discussed now.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, please. Yep. Leon, take the.
Thank you. I'm Leon Weintraub, a retired member of the U.S. Diplomatic Service. I'd like to have a question for Dr. Anani. Mr. Shamir mentioned the strong anti-normalization pressures within Jordan. As an observer, I've noticed both with the treaty with Egypt and with Jordan, this continued strong anti-normalization efforts. I wonder if you could explain to us if the government over the years has had to make any special efforts or expend political strength to make sure this opposition didn't get too strong or out of hand or weaken the ties, and how do you see this opposition continuing in the future?
Well, it is a rather complex picture because in Jordan political parties are not that strong. They are competing with each other, and the strongest party, of course, is an opposition party, namely the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay. The second issue is that absence of political activity on the part of political parties, which we have 47 of them. Not that there is a shortage of them. There's an abundance, which render them rather ineffective. So they have replaced that within the professional unions, associations. Recently, we had a 1-month strike by teachers, which was only recently resolved over payments, but then it somehow, spinned off into political demands. In a way, the professional unions, which are the haven, the abode for resistance of normalization, basically, they use that as a vehicle to promote their own political agendas. So in a way, what we need to do we need to offset whatever arguments they are using to do that. But the government and the parliament, you'll find some parliamentarians who really find this also a good field to snap back at their Israeli counterparts, because somehow there is a hidden conspiracy, unintended conspiracy, between extremes on both sides. They feed into each other's follies. And so in a way, when they hear pronouncements also from the Israeli side that Jordan is the alternative homeland, that Jordan, is a country that is part of the Eretz Israel, therefore many people feel agitated by this. And they the opposition use that as a ground. So no, I'm not blaming only Israel for this, but there are also a large number of Jordanians of Palestinian origin who really would like to see peace, or at least Palestinian aspirations fulfilled. When they see that these are not coming, they express that. So, but when it comes to Jordan has steadfastly, despite all these pressures, Jordan officially has steadfastly maintained the peace process. They maintain to develop and grow the relations between Israel and Jordan. And I think we need also more positive action on the part of the Israeli governments to appreciate that, and also the American administration to appreciate that Jordan is withstanding all the pressures and still maintaining this relationship, because we believe it should work at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you. Ghaith al-Umari on my left.
Thank you, from Washington Institute. Just to follow up on Leon's question to Dr. Anani. I mean, one of the issues that we see is if private Jordanians want to engage with Israel, there is a lot of pushback from, you mentioned that the parties, etc., but no top political cover. In a sense, they're left to fend for their own. Do you see a situation where the Jordanian government officially can provide this top cover and basically send a message domestically that, look, we have peace with Israel and let people work? So what is the political calculation for the government of not taking this proactive position? To Professor Shamir, I'm very curious about the mechanics of formulating Israel's policy vis-a-vis Jordan. One of the issues we always hear from Jordanians is that Israel takes Jordan for granted. And the only proactive voice pushing this relationship is the defense and security establishment. So can you a bit describe how are the policy formulated? Are there other drivers of the policy besides the military and security? And are there ways of creating other drivers if they do not exist? Thank you.
Shimon, you want to start with this?
Yes. Well, as I tried to point out in my presentation, indeed, the strategic dimension is very important in this relationship. But there are other angles to this relationship. We spoke about economics. There are economic interests, are interested in in trying to implement at least part of those many projects that have been discussed. Mr. Anani mentioned the Aqaba Airport project. There are many people in Israel who up to this day regret the fact that joint airport did not materialize, including myself. We were very close to work out a plan that would allow Israelis going to Eilat, land in Aqaba. And I remember a Jordanian Israeli group was sent to Geneva in order to study the Geneva model, which also, the Geneva airport, which also has a similar situation. People can land in Geneva and move straight into France. And it was very close to being implemented. And it was a favorite project of King Hussein at the time, and of Yitzhak Rabin. And yet, once again, pressure groups within Israel felt that this will hurt Israeli interests. There were certain doubts about the possibility of maintaining such a joint project during periods of tension, of political tension and so on. And it didn't come about, and instead we have now the Timna airport, which I personally feel shouldn't have materialized. So there are other angles to this relationship. There is, if you wish, also the cultural dimension, very limited, very modest, but thousands of Israeli citizens, Arab citizens, learn in Jordanian universities. There is now in Jordan a Center for Israeli Studies, and there is close cooperation. It has close cooperation with the center at my university. What is more important, there are attempts at the present to increase IT cooperation and to have outsource of high-tech activities into Jordan. The Jordanian society has a high level of education. There are many people who have know-how about technological methods, and I believe that this area has a future. So there are other dimensions, but yes, we must agree the strategic is the uppermost.
Jawad?
Well, thank you very much. I would like to address the question. Is there when can the if I understood your question correctly, when can the Jordanian government break ranks with the opposition and?
Or I think it's more generally. Ghaith is suggesting that the Jordanian government is not providing an umbrella of support to those Jordanians who might want to partner with Israelis. They're being passive, and by being passive, they're the anti-normalizers get to rule the day.
Well, like I said, officially still we need to work much more on these projects, because the opportunities that are missed are much more than the ones that have already been realized. For instance, the IT that was mentioned a while ago. Jordan, by the way, produces 75% of the Arabic content on the media. Small country. We have companies that are subcontracted by Metro Goldwyn Mayer and other companies to do animation and things for them. We have, right now we have established a university, I am a part of that, to give bachelor degrees for entrepreneurs who invent something in the IT. We don't allow anybody to graduate until he comes up with a novel idea.
Some people are in school for a long time.
Yes, sir. The more the merrier. Well, we are not going to have a very, very large number of students, but Jordanians, by the way, are technology savvy compared to Arab countries and even many developing countries. So in a way, there is an opportunity. So when we begin to, if we continue to look at the obvious areas of coordination, and those somehow are embodied in physical reality, which cannot be ignored, and there is no stable peace that is taking place, any Jordanian government is going to be subjected to pressure. They will all be subjected to pressure. So what we need to encourage politically those guys to come out and say, we are for it, because like we did with the gas project, there was opposition, but there was a very clear government position on this particular project. I think water will become also another important area. I'll tell you what, Jordan has two of the most effective and efficient alternative energy, or what they call renewable energy sources in the world. Ma'an and Tafila. Ma'an for the solar energy, and Tafila for wind energy, which is unbelievable. 10 years ago, we did not have these resources because we did not have the technology. Now we can produce unlimited amount of electricity depending on solar and wind energy from those two places. So in a way, there are many areas that we can use. Once we also make energy and water a little bit cheaper, can you imagine the agricultural potential that can come as a result of cooperation with Israel? So in a way, while we are somehow hesitant about renewing the Ghamr and Baqura, that's what we call them in Jordan, lease, not lease, actually agreement for Israeli farmers to continue to plant. I think that what we need to do is to link those with water and renewable energy technology transfer.
Okay, so
that is something I am
Calls for negotiations.
Yeah.
just before we conclude, I just wanted to ask you about this. Do you think there will be a mutually agreed solution to?
But provided we don't hurry up, let's not politicize the issue. Let us, let the technicians and so on work on it without too much giving it. Maybe the Jordanians are hesitant to renew that as long as to be honest with you, Mr. Netanyahu is the prime minister. But if he changes, I think that Jordanians might be more enticed to give the credit to somebody else.
This is for another discussion, I suppose.
Okay, well, I appreciate the candor.
I am candid. I have to be. Why do I travel if I am going to tell lies here?
You wouldn't be the first. Okay.
That makes me a politician.
All right. I want to thank Professor Shamir and Dr. Anani very much for traveling all the way from their countries, and very much for offering really comprehensive and insightful presentations on the past, present, and even the future of the Jordan-Israel relationship. And just to underscore what I hope is the message of all this, which is with everything that's going on in the Middle East, everything that grabs the headlines, there are certain issues that you just have to keep working on, that don't get on the front page, but that if you don't work on them, they will get on the front page for the wrong reasons. And so I want to thank all of you for being with us today, and thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. Thank you.